Hello, lovely art friends. Today we are drawing the holly jolly Christmas spirit. Who are we kidding? We don't do things the normal way on this channel. Today, we are not drawing the holly jolly Christmas spirits. Instead, we are diving into the terrifying holiday legend of Krampus. And I'm pushing myself way outside of my comfort zone to capture every monstrous detail. You ready? Let's jump right into it. The intro probably explained pretty much everything, but I only just decided to start recording, just for context. I am very stupid. I just have some references of Krampus over here to really capture his essence pretty much. Although it's not going that well, the pose is really difficult honestly, because he has goat legs. And they work a lot differently. Generally legs are just supposed to absorb impact, and then goat legs are just a tad bit different, with certain parts being longer. Also have hooves instead of a flat feet toad, which gets difficult, but I'm working on it. I just needed to draw up a good pose, which I eventually got, deciding on making him hunch over as if looking down on you. That is the idea, at least. Now I just needed to put it on paper. I could technically just go straight into sketching, but with this step beforehand, I can work in a way cleaner way, and I can explore different ideas without it being permanent or messing up the paper. I use it, and I would recommend it to you artists too. For the design itself, here is how I came up with it and where I took my inspiration. Krampus comes from ancient Alpine folklore, probably rooted in pre-Christian winter solstice traditions. Try to say that 3 times, jeez. By the 17th century though, he became tied to Saint Nicholas and Christian customs as a sort of dark counterpart, the one who punishes naughty kids. In fact, records show he was already a part of Germanic storytelling back in the 1600s. Even though his origins are old, the huge surge in Krampus's popularity, from big parades to postcards and the whole Krampusnacht celebration on December 5th, is really just a 21st century thing. I pulled inspiration for my design from both classic paintings and how people portray him today during those celebrations. In the older artworks, he generally looks pretty consistent. A horned, hoofed creature with a tail, kind of goat-like, but with some human traits. The I am sketching here in particular comes from those almost cartoonish versions. And honestly, it's wild to think people were actually frightened of this. I mean, just look at this, a goofy-odd drawing. At Krampusnacht, the Krampus? Krampai? Papai? I'm not really sure what the plural is. The costumes vary a ton, but most still share the same core features. Horns, fur, and a bundle of bridge sticks, called a root. And if I butcher that pronunciation, too bad. Even with those shared traits, there's still a lot of room for creativity. I've seen horns that twist, horns that are sharp and pointy, and horns that curl like a ram's. And this variety is also applicable to the rest. Since Krampus is basically a demonic figure, a lot of designs lean into that, with inverted crosses and pentagrams, which I decided to include here. And because it is Christmas time, I also decided to add some festive touches, like ornaments and rope, to tie it all together. And after some time, we've got our sketch. The only thing we need to do now is the inking. The thing is, I don't want to immediately jump into rendering it, because maybe I will screw something up. And because we have these really interesting elements that are overlaying in really strange ways, like over here too, I kind of have to find a good way to distinguish elements yet combine them in a very strange way. Which is going to be quite difficult. But earlier in the vid, I did rip off one piece of paper from my little stash of papers over there. And I think I'm gonna use that one to try and figure out how to actually combine certain art tools, you know? Oh, let me grab it. Come here. And back. The art supplies that I ended up testing and combining were graphite, markers, ink, and watercolor. Honestly, there are just a few combinations that were going to be actually useful, them being watercolor on markers, ink on markers, and using ink washes. Especially combining ink with watercolor calls for some really interesting textures and effects. Inks can't be lifted from the paper by water, which means I can freely mix watercolors over the washes without removing what I had already made. I can show you more clearly in a bit, but you just gotta stay with me for a second, okay? I still don't really have to bother with the colors, you know, because first, I gotta do the inks. And even before that,
I got a line in this sketch, so that's what I'm doing right now.
For me personally, the inking process is always a very tranquil yet very stressful step. Every line you make is a permanent one, which is why it is both relaxing and stressful at the same time. I don't have to constantly worry about if I'm setting the right line, because, oh well, it's permanent, you know? But I also have to worry about setting the right line because, well, it's permanent. Kinda funny how paradoxical that is. I only really noticed it after I've inked like a dozen drawings or something. You probably shouldn't be that concerned about it. You might notice in here that my lines aren't all the same width, and that's because of a concept called line weight. I make certain lines thicker to show where the light can and can't reach. I go a bit more in depth on how this technique works in my other videos, so if you'd like to know more, you can click right up there. First watch this one though, because if you don't. Here I am already working on the shadows, which I did with pure black shapes.
I know,
And then coming back with a brush and dry brushing some ink onto the paper to create some nice texture. I had made a TikTok tutorial about this technique. Follow me, by the way. And one of you pointed out that I had actually called it the wrong thing. I called it smudging because, you know, I didn't know what it was. So thank you to the person correcting me. I still have to make a video about it that I was just spreading misinformation, but I'm just gonna sweep it under the rug for now. And then at the very last, I just have to go over it with some ink washes. Ink washes are just incredible. You dilute your ink by adding some water to it, which will give you a lower opacity. And with that you can build up layers and layers and layers. I personally am not really that patient, so I don't use just one bowl with a certain opacity. I have one that's a higher opacity and one that has a lower opacity, so I can just switch around and do it very easily. And with that, I could create this cool effect.
The main Krampus is done. These are Christmas ornaments. I don't know what you call them in English, but in Dutch, you call them kerstballen. Anyways, I didn't use the regular way to make this too. Instead of this, I used the ink washes and built up layers and layers, and that way I could get this really cool kind of effect going on. But this is just the first part. So now I gotta go over to this bad boy. Or this one, or that one. Or the Merry Christmas, or the Krampus, I don't know.
I very quickly had a plan utilizing pencils and watercolors, but I also just as quickly realized that that was probably not gonna work. So instead of that, I thought of something else.
I've done the line art. I didn't film me blacking in these shapes here. I just didn't feel like it. Get wrecked. For the rendering, for the rest, I decided to do a little experiment, and I did it on this piece of paper. Basically what I've done is use the ink washes that I did with this and layered a tiny bit of watercolor over it to give it a tiny bit of color. Digital art, this is also done. You first create your drawing in gray tones, and then you layer over the colors and then blending modes and all that, or you use gradient maps. And I'm using the same concept, except not digital, basically. Maybe editing me will explain it more. I don't know.
No, I won't. Honestly, I don't know what past me was talking about. It kinda sounds like I'm having a stroke. What I actually did was layer down my gray tones to get my values correct, utilizing darker values for the fur and lighter ones for the skin, to separate the features. Only then do I apply my watercolors, and I do that very lightly. Because watercolor has opacity, everything that is under it will shine through to the top, so the values that are already there will still be there. That was the idea behind it. And as you can see, the ink washes already looked, really good. Another reason why ink washes and watercolors work so well together is because of something I said earlier, lifting. Not with weights, it's a bit different. Putting a bit of water on a dried area of watercolor, you can lift up a bit of color, but you can't with ink washes. Which means I could mix, blend and whatever more without it ruining what I already had. I didn't want this drawing to become oversaturated. It is a very easy way to make your drawings look less scary and unrealistic. Think of cartoons. Those characters all have very vibrant, happy colors. We don't want that. So instead, I worked very lightly, utilizing blues and purples for the skin. Healthy skin has nice red and yellowish tones that make your skin feel alive. If we instead use blues and purples, you will very quickly get the sense of dead or undead skin. I only utilize red for bloody red highlights by the pentagram and his mouth, which I ended up really liking. And with that, we have our two main subjects.
So I'm just gonna work on this Krampus lettering because I'm pretty certain of what I want to do here. As you can see here, the markers in combination with black watercolor, it gives a really cool effect. And I want to do that for the letters, layering it over the ink, pretty much. And hopefully, that'll look nice.
The letters were actually quite simple. Like I said, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to do. With my Special Forces illustrations, I also do the same thing with watercolor, but instead of doing it on red, I do it on white. There was only one thing that kind of concerned me, and that was his leg. Not the back one, but the front one. I could either just go over it and pretty much just ignore it, or let the letter go behind it to have that three-dimensional effect. But if I did that, the P would be hidden, and that would make it kind of unclear what it says. Eventually, I did settle on doing the letters behind the leg, but it did mean that I had to move the letter P over a bit. You don't really notice it though, which was a relief. Really, actually, I really liked how this turned out. It looks gritty, bloody, and amazing. At this point, I've pretty much done all major elements, but we are far from done. I have to do several things: the Merry Christmas, December 5th, the eye, and the pentagram, which I'm doing right here. For the past little drawings, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Not for this one though. I really wanted to get an interesting glitch effect going on, combining the pentagram with the crosses and the eyes. I have tested several ways of making glitched effects, like using break lines, certain colors, and extracting the RGB values from the thing I'm trying to make. And eventually I ended up on a very specific effect for the eyes around the pentagram, which gave an almost blurry effect, which I found fascinating. For the pentagram itself, making the overlapping areas yellow and the ones that overlap 3 times orange. I really struggled on making this part look good and cohesive, but in the end, I like to think that I got there. No joke, this might actually be my favorite part of the whole drawing. I will definitely be exploring this glitched effect in the future. Deciding between the 3 subjects that were left, I thought that finishing the Merry Christmas was the right call to make. I would be able to blacken that side, which would make it way easier for me to work on the top 2 elements. The Christmas colors are red, green and white, thus it seemed pretty logical to use those as the main 3 colors. A pattern of red, white, green and white, repeating over and over. It's kind of like a candy cane, but even better. And as a finishing touch, adding some festive Christmas lighting. Although there are 2 elements left, let's just combine them into one. It will make it a lot easier to work with. I inked both of the elements at the same time to save some ink and time, and then went full in with markers on the eye. I was looking for a backlit midnight effect, which I thought I could achieve with blue tones nearing the edge and black tones at the core of the figure. Technically this should have worked, but it didn't end up how I wanted it, which is kind of a shame. So to correct it, I decided to slather some watercolor over it, to cover up my mistakes and my shame. Finally! At last, coming to the December 5th, which I finalized with a teeny bit of marker for the Santa hat and a bit of watercolor for some nice texture. Ladies, gentlemen, and artists, I present to you Krampus. Subscribe! Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I just use these parts to yap pretty much, and it allows you to click another video of mine right there. I had a lot of fun drawing this, genuinely, and if you guys like these one drawing type of videos, make sure to comment because I love making them. I love my presents. And with that statement, I will end the video.